Hi, I'm Dan. I lead the auth optimization team at Stripe, and today we're going to talk about driving higher revenue conversion. First, I want to start with a personal story of when I failed at hacking conversion. So many moons ago, I was an entrepreneur running my own business, and it was exciting in the early days. We were getting our name out there, we had some good early momentum. In our business, it was this incredibly novel idea for a startup. We were a food delivery platform. Okay, so maybe it wasn't totally novel, but we had our own spin on it. We were focused on healthy food. We were operating in New York at the time, and we were working with a large network of local restaurants delivering healthy meals to our customers. And it was a project of mine at the time of trying to go land our first corporate account. So we were talking to this large law firm in New York about making us their primary delivery platform for all of their employees to use. This is going to be an important early sale to help fuel some of our early growth, and I was hoping this firm would become a reference customer to go land more corporate accounts. So when the benefits person that we're talking to, it's time for her to test the platform, and she goes to place her first order. As you can see up here, she got a decline on that first order. So she calls me up, she's kind of frustrated, she wants to know why she got this error. We scramble, we get her food, but I could tell the tone of the conversation at that point had changed. And while we kept talking, ultimately she and the firm decided that they couldn't trust a startup, and we lost the sale at a time when we really needed it. So this moment of getting a decline, it was frustrating for her, it caused a loss of trust. But as a business owner, this was incredibly painful. As an entrepreneur, as many of you know, you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into trying to build this great new product that doesn't exist, and to trying to get new customers onto your website or app for the first time to try your product. So you put in all of this hard work, and that last mile step of taking purchase intent and turning it into actual revenue, it sometimes doesn't work. And as an entrepreneur, it's really painful when it doesn't. So now at Stripe, I get to sit on the other side of this challenge, helping other businesses overcome this and drive revenue conversion. So let's just take a step back for a second. Let's imagine an ideal world. If the customer is who they say they are, if they have money, and they want to buy your product, it should just work. And here's what that looks like. Your customer would get to the checkout completion step, and they would breeze right on through. Then your fraud protection systems would perfectly filter out illegitimate customers and let all the good ones through. And then the issuing bank on the other side of this transaction, they would approve 100% of good transactions. You'd be through these 3 steps in the conversion funnel, done, revenue in the bank. Okay, here's the complication. We don't live in this ideal world. So let's take a look at what actually happens. Okay, so imagine you've got this great product, you've got all these customers lined up who want to buy it, you have this big pool of potential revenue just sitting right there. All right, your customers hit checkout. 26% of US online shoppers abandoned a shopping cart in the last 3 months alone simply because the checkout process was too long or complicated. All right, our potential revenue pool, it just shrunk. Now we have to prevent fraud. The average cost of fraud for online businesses today is 2% of total revenues, and that number is growing. More margin out of the funnel. Okay, now we need the issuer to approve the transaction. Now in the physical world with card-present transactions, businesses typically see very high approval rates. But when you shift to digital transactions happening online, we on average see approval rates that are 10% lower versus card-present. So you can see we just went through these 3 steps of the conversion funnel, and our potential revenue pool, it just shrunk. So you're probably thinking, at this point in the story, this isn't very uplifting so far. So let's flip it around. Let's put some air back in the balloon, because where there's loss, there's opportunity. And what we see is when online businesses invest in this conversion funnel and they really start optimizing the different pieces along the way, there's significant revenue upside that can be achieved. For large businesses, that can mean full percentage points gains in revenue. And we sometimes see with startups, when they invest in optimizing this conversion funnel, they can achieve revenue upside of up to 10%. That's huge. And not only that, it all leads to a better customer experience. This conversion funnel, this is an area where businesses can make payments a strategic advantage. So today in this talk, we're going to dive into each part of the funnel: checkout, fraud prevention, network acceptance. And we're going to show you what Stripe is working on. And we're going to hopefully arm you with some practical ideas that you can take back to your business and put into practice in order to drive higher revenue conversion and ultimately to deliver a better experience to your customers. So I actually want to start with a quick organizational hack. Something that's interesting is when you look at these 3 steps from the customer standpoint, they happen almost simultaneously. It's within milliseconds of each other. And not only that, but the variables, they're interdependent. If you make a change in one place, it will impact what happens in others. Let me show you. So let's just say you've got a very short checkout form, right? That's great for getting people through the checkout completion process, but you've collected less information for your fraud prevention system and less information for the issuer to evaluate the transaction. Okay, flip it around. Now you've got a much longer checkout form, so you're collecting a lot of information. Bad for checkout, good for fraud prevention and network acceptance. Okay, so between these 2 choices, which is the right answer? Well, as you know, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The answer is going to be dependent on each individual business and their business goals. But unless you're measuring the outcomes across this whole funnel, you won't know what the right answer is. Okay, so let's get back to the organizational point. What's interesting is when we talk to businesses, we sometimes see the responsibilities across the 3 steps here in the funnel split between 3 different teams. Now that part's okay, but what can be troubling is if there's not good coordination among teams. Because without good coordination, you can end up with one team that's just locally optimizing for their specific area, but not holistically optimizing for what's best for the business. And when we talk to the most sophisticated companies out there, they really bring close coordination to managing this conversion funnel. And what that looks like is having shared metrics and goals across teams. It means when they implement changes or they run experiments, they're measuring outcomes across the full funnel, not just in a particular area. And ultimately, it means that teams are aligned and trying to optimize the right business outcomes. So today, we're going to talk to a company that really embodies this philosophy and has spent a lot of time investing in developing a great payments experience for their customers. We're going to be talking to Matthew Neff. He's the global head of product at Skip the Dishes and Just Eat. Matthew has personally spent a lot of time in helping create a great payments experience for customers on Skip the Dishes. Now, Skip the Dishes is Canada's leading online delivery platform. They work with over 20,000 restaurants coast to coast across Canada, and their technology platform powers millions of orders every month. And yes, for the next few minutes, I get to live vicariously through what it looks like to run a successful food delivery business. So let's please welcome Matthew to the stage.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Dan.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming in. All right, so as I learned, Matthew, in the food delivery business, we face a lot of competition. So tell me about your role at Skip the Dishes and what you've done to really invest in creating a great customer experience and a great payments experience.
Yeah, so my initial role was leading our customer application team, which is responsible for our apps, our web page that we send out. And really, we have a very simple goal on that team. Number one, we want to make it as easy as possible for a customer to get through the order experience and to find the food they want. And number two, we want to make it as easy as possible for good customers to pay on our network. And when I look at how we apply this, sometimes it's valuable to have an example of something where it's not maybe the most effective payment experience that I actually experienced quite recently. So I went to a large department store because I wanted to buy a new pair of shoes. I went in there, I found the shoes I wanted, I went to the checkout line to pay for them. There were a few people ahead of me, and I could see the person at the front of the till slowly folding up the clothes of the person ahead of them. They were collecting a bunch of information of, tell me what your email address is, what is your phone number, slowly entering that information. And then when the person finally said, cashier said, how do you want to pay? The customer said, credit card. And the cashier says, well, would you like to sign up for our credit card? And the customer says, no, I don't want your credit card today. And the cashier says, well, if you sign up for our credit card, you'll get 15% off. So then the customer says, okay, I'll sign up for it. And they start filling out this paper form. Meanwhile, there's a long lineup of people behind them trying to buy their products, And eventually, not being a very patient person, I just gave up, I set the shoes aside, and I walked away. So in the front row, if you're wondering why my shoes look so old and raggedy, I tried. But when I look at that example, it's such a shame because they did everything that they needed to in order to have the product that I wanted, get me into the store, get me as far as the checkout experience, and then they just made that step too complicated, so they lost me. And when I look at that and I apply it to a business like Skip the Dishes, I see that as just a huge shame, because the hardest thing in business is to win a new customer. And when our restaurant team does all of the work that it takes to sign restaurants up on our platform that customers want to order from, or our courier team recruits couriers and brings them out onto the network, our tech team builds a product that people want to use, our marketing team creates awareness of it, and everybody can have their job done correctly. And once you get to that final step or that payment moment, we can blow it all if we put too much in the way of the customer.
Great, thank you. Tell us, as Skip the Dishes has grown from a small startup to now a very large, successful company, how have you had to evolve your fraud prevention practices?
So I'll answer this one in two parts. So the first part I'll talk about is the principles of how we've looked at fraud prevention and how we make decisions on what we're going to implement. And then the second part is I'll give you a little bit of our history, because this is something that has changed. It's actually one of the largest mistakes we made as a company as we were growing, was under-investing in fraud and not being ready for it when it happened. So the first part is, how do we make decisions about what we invest in for fraud protection? And one of the themes that you hear a lot of the time at these types of conferences, or if you talk to traditional companies, is the fraud team will say, the marketing team won't let me implement anything. Every time I come up with a fraud control, they block it, and they don't allow us to put it in because they just think that we're going to kill a conversion. And if you have this tense relationship with your marketing team, it really comes down to two things for me. One, as a tech team, you haven't done your job of educating them on the value of the fraud controls or evaluating the value of those. Or number two, your marketing team's probably right, that you probably are putting too much in the way of the customer. And when I look at this, as it relates to our growth cycle, so the second part of it is we started off Skip the Dishes in a bunch of small mid-market cities in Canada. So places like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta. And when we looked at transactions there, the odds of that transaction resulting in a chargeback was 1 in 16,600.
So much more trustworthy than Americans. It's amazing.
Salt of the earth people in the prairies. But as we expanded as a company and as we grew, we started going into markets like Ontario and Quebec, and what we found is the chances of that same one transaction being fraudulent was 1 in 50. So all of a sudden, we had a country where we grew up where it was 1 in 16,600, didn't have to invest a lot in fraud. All of a sudden, we hit 1 in 50. And what that caused for us as a company is we ended up in the Visa Fraud Monitoring Program, which I don't know, is everybody here aware of what that is? All Stripe customers, nobody's actually had to be involved in that one before. This was prior to Stripe, by the way. I'll put that plug in for you guys.
Get it, yeah.
That we ended up in the fraud monitoring program. And when that happens, the issuers start to look at your transactions and say, Skip the Dishes, we don't want to approve that one. And your conversion and your transaction approval rates end up tanking. Which we experienced at a point when we were in a very high growth cycle. And what that does is every time one of those transactions was lost, we lost that customer and we lost the value of them. So looking back, had we actually invested in tools prior to expanding into those markets, we would have grown much more rapidly. And fortunately, we were able to quickly recover. We're now in good shape, but it was definitely one of our largest mistakes as a company.
So earlier this year, you transferred all of your processing volume over to Stripe, enterprise-level deployment. I think you did it in under 3 months. How were you able to pull off such a large migration project like that successfully in such a short time frame?
So if I look at what we did on that project, Number one, I am very fortunate that I get to go to work every day and work with a brilliant team of payments and fraud people. Actually, one of our product managers is here, Carol. Hey, Carol. As well as a very talented development team. So number one, having a great team. The second thing that we did is we brought the whole Stripe team on site right at the start of the project. Because I'm sure everybody here has worked on the project where you and your team lead scope it out, you imagine how it's all going to work, you write the tickets, you send them out to all the developers, and when it's time to merge the front end with the back end, things just don't quite work how you expect them to. So we went, we're going to avoid that. Let's have the Stripe team come on site with us in Winnipeg, engineers and everything, and let's talk about how this flow is going to work and how this solution is going to work. So Winnipeg, beautiful place to visit in January for the guys. Minus 30 weather. It was unseasonably warm for them while they were there visiting. But that was a critical part of the project, getting a shared understanding at the start. The second thing we did is we invited them into our Slack channels. So we used Jessica Yan as deployment services. We had Jamie as our account manager right in our Slack channel. So if we needed something between our team and the Stripe team, there was no hesitation of bouncing emails back and forth. The other thing that we did was very, very quick decision making. So anytime we needed a decision or a direction on something, it was very, very quick and responsive. And that's really some of those things are what has helped us deploy it so quickly.
Okay, great. So since you've been on Stripe for the last few months, you've seen some interesting results. Can you share with us what you've seen, results, learnings?
Yeah, definitely. That we, at our core at Skip the Dishes, have always viewed ourselves as a tech company, and we usually have a build-it-first mentality. So whenever we're looking at partnering with another company and putting that on somebody else, we're very picky about who we select as a partner. And I can say for us, Stripe has been our most successful partner relationship in the software space. Because since going over to Stripe, we've seen a 6% uptick in our payment processing approval rates, which you increase your payment processing approval rates, you're going to convert more customers. And when I look at the impact of that on our business, for every 1 million transactions we look at, that's 60,000 people who are getting a better experience and who are experiencing our service. So being a small town guy from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, that's over double the population of the hometown that I'm from. The other thing that we've seen is a further 30%. So from our peak of chargebacks, we're down 90%, a further 30% since moving to Stripe. It's at an all-time low. And then some of the other features that we've been able to leverage and get a lot of value out of is things like radar. So our old process for looking at putting new fraud controls in place, you always have to ask yourself, is this going to result in false positives? So we would implement a rule in the background, run it in the background, evaluate that rule, and make a decision if we were going to implement it in production. With things like radar, we just look at that rule against all of our historical data and can make quick decisions on, does this new rule, whether it's velocity rules or anything, make sense to change in our business.
Great. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to dive back into the conversion funnel, go into each step, and take a look at some of the common pain points that we see and show you some ideas of what you can do to combat them. So let's start out with checkout completion. The name of the game here is removing as much unnecessary friction as possible. So I actually want to do a quick poll of the audience here. Raise your hand if you've been through your own company's checkout process in the last month. Okay, that's great. I see a lot of hands. I was hoping to see 100% of hands. This is a simple hack, but this is something that every single company should be doing on a regular basis. I promise you, every time you go through your own company's checkout flow, you will find places where there's friction that you can pull out. And I promise you, this is not just a tip for startups. This is something that established businesses should be doing all the time. If you don't believe me, our CEO, Patrick, recently went through our own onboarding process on Stripe. He created 10 pages of notes with screenshots that he sent out to the company of places where we were introducing potential friction or confusion. This is something that we can all get better on. Okay, so at Stripe, we're obsessive about studying payment forms and trying to find all the different ways, big and small, that we can reduce friction. And there are a ton of mini optimizations that one can do. And I'm guessing folks here in the audience, they do many of the things that you see here on screen. But we want to just dive into a few examples of some common mistakes that we see companies make. The first one is card number validation in real time. As the customer is entering their card info, if they enter wrong information or perhaps an incorrect character, does the payment form alert them in real time that this is happening? We've all been there. When we hit pay, we get some vague error message. We have to scroll back through the payment form and try and figure out where we made a mistake. The best payment forms will solve that problem before they've even hit that step. But only 38% of checkouts online do this. OK, the next one, autofill. Does your payment form support autofill of saved credit card details? 21% of businesses don't. We know browsers support it. As you can see, almost 80% of businesses support it. Don't be that company that makes your customer get up from the couch and have to go get their credit card all the way across the room to pay. Let's shift gears and talk about mobile checkout. Over 50% of e-commerce traffic is now happening on smartphones. But we see cart abandonment rates that are 2x that on smartphones compared to desktop. And the end result is that only 32% of online revenue is actually being transacted on mobile today. So mobile checkout deserves attention. 2 items to make sure that you check the box on. Is your mobile checkout form responsive? And do you offer the ability to pay with mobile wallets, which are oftentimes the least friction way to pay for something on your smartphone? Now, one optimization on mobile checkout that a lot of businesses oftentimes overlook is, does your form bring up a numerical keypad when it's time to enter card info? It's really annoying having to enter your 16 digits on just a normal keypad on your smartphone, but 33% of businesses fail to include this feature. Now let's talk global for a second. Greater than 50% of global online payments do not happen directly on cards. I know this stat is hard to believe in the US, but across the globe, you see heavy use of digital wallets, bank transfers, and other local payment methods. With businesses and customers crossing borders faster than ever these days, it's really important for checkout forms to meet their customers where they want to pay. So make sure that you have a checkout form that can accept local currencies and local payment methods. OK, so we've hit on a few of these optimization examples. This is the payments experience stuff that we obsess over at Stripe. And we've channeled all of these learnings and optimizations into our checkout products. If you want a fully hosted and optimized checkout form that allows you to be up and running in minutes, we have Stripe Checkout. If you want to design and build your own checkout experience, we have Stripe Elements, which are a set of design UI building blocks that allow you to craft your own experience with all of these optimized behaviors that we've talked about built in. And for anyone here who's doing business in Europe, we know it's September, SEA is top of mind. All of these products come with our built-in SEA exemption engine, so that way you can reduce the impact that 3DS will have on checkout conversion. On to fraud prevention. To frame the challenge of fraud prevention, it's actually helpful to understand that the cost of fraud hits businesses in a few different places. The first one's obvious, having to pay for the cost of the fraudulent purchases themselves and the associated chargeback fees. But the second one is one that businesses oftentimes overlook, and that's the cost of fraud false positives. This is when your fraud prevention systems block legitimate transactions from going through on incorrect suspicion of fraud. And we see for online businesses that on average, they lose 1% to 2% of legitimate revenues because of these fraud false positives. And then the last one is the operational cost of actually having to manage chargebacks. We sometimes see with small businesses that they review and triage every single chargeback. It's a drain on resources. So take it all together, fraud's big, it's a pain, and it's hard to stay ahead of because online fraudsters continue to get more sophisticated and adapt their practices. And it's why from very early days, Stripe invested in building Radar. Radar is our machine learning fraud prevention product that detects if transactions are legitimate or fraudulent. And we look at thousands of signals across the Stripe network, and for each transaction to evaluate for an individual transaction whether or not we should let it through. And as with anything with machine learning, the power of it is really built on top of the data that we have and the size of the Stripe network that we can utilize. When a new customer comes to your business, you may not have seen them before, but for every single transaction on Stripe, there's an 89% chance that we will have seen that card before. And this machine learning approach works. We see on average that businesses who use Stripe Radar are able to reduce fraud by 32%. And you heard in the keynote today how our team is obsessively shipping improvements to our fraud prevention system. So we're working hard behind the scenes, but let's talk about some ways that you can take charge of your own fraud prevention. fraud does not punish every business equally. And here's what I mean. Let's say that you're a software company. You have low COGS, high margin. That lost margin from one fraudulent purchase, that could easily be made up for in just 2 or 3 legitimate transactions because of your margin profile. But shift gears and let's look at an online retailer who's low margin, high COGS. Having to front the cost of a single fraudulent purchase, it might take 10 or more legitimate transactions to make up that lost margin. And the reason why I bring up this point is that every business faces a trade-off around how strict they need to make their fraud filters. The online retailer here, they need strict fraud filters because it's most important to them to block fraud. While the software business, what's most important is to let as many legitimate transactions go through. And so the right trade-off of where to sit on this curve, it's going to vary by business, but it's an important thing for businesses to understand where they should sit. And so with Stripe Radar, we now allow you to move and test your fraud blocking threshold directly in the dashboard. And what's most useful here is we allow you to adjust your setting and see the impact it would have had on your business looking at your historical data. Right, think about what Matt talked about earlier, where he's able to implement radar rules and get that immediate feedback loop to understand what impact it would have had on his business, instead of having to wait weeks to understand, did he make the right decision? We've had this exact same mindset that we built into this new feature. Okay, so even as you hone your fraud prevention practices, chargebacks, they're painful, they're costly, they're time-consuming, and for some businesses, that drain on resources, it's just not worth it. They don't want to touch it. And this year, Stripe built chargeback protection. With chargeback protection, if the business has a fraudulent dispute, Stripe will cover the full amount as well as the chargeback fee. It's a way for businesses to fully outsource the burden of chargebacks if they don't want to deal with it. Okay, so customers through checkout, they're through fraud prevention. Now let's talk network acceptance. You're looking at decline responses. A decline occurs when the issuing bank doesn't want to approve the transaction. Now, sometimes the response makes sense. Insufficient funds, the customer doesn't have funds. But oftentimes, the information you get back in these numerical response codes from networks and issuers is vague and unhelpful in understanding what's really going on behind the hood, under the hood. And the most commonly used catch-all is the dreaded O5 do not honor that you see on screen here. So let's break it down. Why do declines typically occur? As I mentioned, one's fairly obvious. The customer may not have funds. This is a common source of declines on debit and prepaid transactions. Now, a second common source of declines is due to outdated credentials. Cardholders get issued new cards all the time, but they may not have updated their payment information with your business. And this can result in a pretty large source of declines for many businesses today, and it comes back in a number of those different decline reasons that you looked at. Third major reason, suspicion of fraud. So this is where something in the issuing bank's risk model sees something that it doesn't like and it blocks a transaction. Now, sometimes these are correct decisions that the issuing bank is making, but we oftentimes see that for every correct decision they're making on suspicion of fraud, they're actually blocking 5 legitimate transactions from going through. And we see this play out in our radar data. So this is costly. All right, keeping these reasons in mind, let's take a look at how Stripe and our customers are driving down declines. So as you heard in the keynote today, a major new optimization feature that we're launching is our new machine learning powered real-time retries engine. Here's how it works. So let's say we get a charge request, we submit the charge to the network, and a decline response comes back. Well, before we return that declined charge response to the Stripe customer, in real time, we have machine learning models that are evaluating, should we retry this transaction immediately, and what can we do to optimize the information that we're sending within the authorization request to increase the odds of acceptance. And the results we're seeing are powerful. Over 5% of the declines that we retry in real time come back with an approval. So for Stripe customers, without having to lift a finger or make any changes to their Stripe integration, this is just pure revenue upside, turning declines into approvals. The next feature I want to hit on that we're excited to make available is access to the real-time card account updater. This means that we can check for potential credential updates directly in the authorization flow. You remember I mentioned that outdated credentials are a common source of decline? Well, here, when we submit the charge request, we can check against the network's card account updater systems, and if an update is available, it will get directly attached to the auth message. And when we get the approval response back, we will also get those updated credentials that we can save on file for you for future payments. So think about that scenario where you have a customer who got reissued a new card yesterday or last week. They haven't received it in the mail. They haven't updated it with your business. This is a way that we can get those updates in real time during the auth message. Real-time retries, card account updater, these are optimizations that are applicable for all business types. But I want to take a minute and just talk about the special needs that recurring revenue business models have. Declines are a big deal for subscription businesses. If you think about a subscription, it's not just a single transaction. It's really a contract for a series of future payments. And if you get a decline at one point, that can cut off that full revenue stream. So this is a big deal for subscription businesses to manage. And you can see it's a challenge. 9% of subscription invoices fail on the first attempt for payment. That's a big number. So we've put a lot of investment into building advanced revenue recovery tools for these subscription businesses. And the results are powerful. We see that users of Stripe Billing, our subscription product, they're able to save over 40% of that initially declined subscription revenue. That's huge revenue uplift. Now, there's a lot of work and optimization features that go into achieving that 40% result. But I want to highlight just one feature because I think it illustrates some interesting learnings. So with recurring revenue businesses, if you get a decline, the good news is that you still have time left in the billing cycle to try and get an approval at a later date. So many businesses will retry at later times. This is common in the industry. It's known as dunning. Now, I want to clarify, these time-based retries that we're talking about here, this is different than the real-time retries that I mentioned. Okay, so with dunning, an issue in the industry is that a lot of the solutions on the market, they use very basic time-based logic. Get a decline, wait 7 days. Try again 7 days later. Try again 7 days later. There's not a lot of nuance going on. So we've built a much more sophisticated approach that uses machine learning and the data that we see across the Stripe network. For example, we'll time our retries based on specific issuer-level behaviors when they're most likely to accept a transaction. This is especially important for cross-border businesses where that first attempt, let's say the issuing bank sits halfway across the world, that first attempt could have occurred in the middle of the night when issuer risk models are most risk-averse. So we can time it based on where the issuer sits to get an approval. And we'll look across the Stripe network. If we see that payment method that was initially declined being used elsewhere successfully, we know it's a good time to retry it with high odds of approval. And so for businesses operating on the type of monthly billing cycle that you see up on the slide, this more nuanced approach is 14% better than just basic time-based retries. And not only that, we're saving Stripe customers money because we're not wasting retries when they're not going to work. Now, coming up after this talk, there's a technical talk called Tackling the Conversion Challenge with Machine Learning. It's taking place on the other stage. During this talk, you're going to hear from other members of the auth optimization team, where we're going to go into a lot more depth around the experimentation and machine learning approach that our team uses. It's really fascinating stuff. If you're interested in payments or you just want to learn about what a multi-arm bandit is, I really encourage you to check it out. But I did want to provide just a sneak preview into some of the experiments that we run on our team. Okay, so it's helpful to remember that on the other side of this transaction is an issuing bank. And every issuing bank has their own unique black box risk model. It's a mishmash of different third-party systems and ML models and custom risk rules that are constantly changing. Oftentimes, issuers themselves can't even explain why certain decisions were made by this black box risk model. So we do a lot of experimentation because in essence, we're trying to reverse engineer and understanding what preferences are being expressed by each individual risk model. Let's look at one example dealing with new network features. Networks regularly release new features or configurations. The example you're looking at on the slide is the new credential on file framework that first came out in late 2017. I'm not going to go into details, but anyone here who works closely in payments, you know this was a significant change in the way you're supposed to format transactions for repeat customers. Now, when new network features come out, a lot of processors will just kind of blindly adopt them and move on. But when you're looking at trying to optimize auth rates, what matters most is have issuers adopted the new framework and how have they adjusted their own risk models in response. Right, so this new framework that came out in late 2017, let's fast forward a few months to April 2018. We're comparing auth rate performance here of the new credential on file framework against the old regular e-commerce framework. And what you can see here is this wide variation. This is a shuffled list of top issuers in the US. You see wide variation among which framework is going to give you better auth performance. As you can see by the green bars, some issuers have adopted this new framework quickly, giving preferential treatment. But you can also see that a lot of issuers are providing worse auth rate performance on this new framework. So this type of nuanced experimentation and testing approach, it really allows us to optimize our behaviors issuer by issuer. All right, fast forward 12 months, April 2019. We see consistent higher performance among this new credential on file framework against the old framework. And so it's this continuous testing approach that really allows us to adapt to what the data is telling us from issuers. Hopefully this gives you just a small flavor of why experimentation and rigorous testing really matters in this space. And I really encourage you, check out the technical talk after this to learn more. Home stretch, I promise. We spoke about checkout, we spoke about fraud prevention, network acceptance. I just want to take a couple minutes and spend a few minutes looking to the future of revenue conversion. What are the topics that we'll be talking about more in the months and years to come? Historically, conversion, it's just measured statically on a transaction-by-transaction basis in the industry. And I think this is a legacy mindset, because we have to remember that a transaction is just one outcome, but behind every transaction there's a customer. And a customer represents a lifetime of outcomes. For example, if there's a decline, what's the real impact of that decline on your business? Let's pretend you're a ride-sharing startup in San Francisco. Maybe that decline just came from a tourist visiting from out of town, and that single decline only cost you 1 or 2 future transactions. But let's say that customer is someone who's going to be commuting to work every single day. That decline could have cost this business 10 or more future transactions. It's really important to understand your customers behind this data. Now, there are a lot of different insights that one can draw from this, but I just want to dive into one area looking at high-value customers because of their importance to every business. Let's look at some data. This is a random set of top Stripe customers. And what we've done is we've isolated high-value customers for them. So these are high-value customers, people who've placed 10 or more purchases. And we've taken them and we've now split them into 2 different cohorts. Those who always received approvals, and those who experienced just a single decline back in Q3 2018. So between these 2 cohorts, we wanted to measure what's the difference in return purchase rate. How much does getting that one single decline matter? And as expected, there's a return purchase rate drop-off for those who experience a decline. But what's really interesting is looking at the variation by merchants. If you look at merchant 2 and 3 up here, there's over a 50% drop-off rate from high-value customers just from one single decline. While for merchant 6 and 7, the reaction's more muted, right? It's a less than 20% drop-off rate in return purchases. Now, the important thing here is that for businesses to understand their data and to really pay attention to their customers and their high-value customers. For example, it's so important for merchants 2 and 3 on here to know that these high-value customers had a negative experience and do everything they can to bring them back to the business in a positive way. Now, this is something we're working on at Stripe. We want to give Stripe customers more insight into both the historical and future predicted value of their customers. This is in the works. Now, let's say that we understand our customers really well. We have all this real-time intelligence coming in. We have a nuanced understanding of our business goals. The next step where this is headed is what I like to call dynamic conversion. Being able to take each unique interaction and optimize the correct behaviors across the funnel and do it in real time. This can look like dynamically changing checkout forms that expand and contract to collect more information as necessary. Or maybe radar risk rules that are constantly adapting to different customer profiles. Or dynamic offers that get triggered to your high-value customers when they're about to drop off from the funnel. Imagine the same checkout form for a car rental business, 2 returning customers. But something's off about that first customer coming back in, right? Some of the risk signals we've collected makes us suspicious of this. Well, the checkout form should just dynamically expand to collect more information. On the other hand, the second customer fully trusted. The checkout form should contract to get them through the checkout process as fast as possible, and all of this should just be happening automatically. So at the beginning of this, I shared a story of how my business was the victim of a costly decline. And it's really great for me to be able to sit on the other side now at Stripe, helping other businesses combat this challenge and drive higher revenues. I hope you're able to take away some lessons from today that you can take back to your business and put into practice, test, and experiment, and figure out ways to increase revenue conversion and really deliver a better experience for your customers. If you want to talk about conversion, auth optimization, experiments, please come find me afterwards. I'd love to chat. And if you want to learn more about what it takes to run a successful food delivery business, I'm afraid for that, you better go talk to Matthew. Thank you so much, everybody.